Something very interesting is happening right now. And too many people in North America aren't paying any attention. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney is in the midst of a major visit to Australia. And on the surface, it looks like routine diplomacy. But no, much like all Carney's foreign trips, it's far from it. Because during this trip, Carney locked in a potentially $10 billion investment signed by a new defense and technology agreement and deepened a partnership with one of the few countries on Earth that looks economically and politically a lot like Canada. But here's the bigger story. In a world pushed into a head-tailspin by the US, global economies are being pulled in different directions. And consequently, countries like Canada, Australia, and many in Europe are starting to work much closer together. Not just as friends, but as strategic partners. So in today's video, we are going to break down 4 key aspects from Carney's trip. First, the 10 billion investment announcement. Second, the growing Canada-Australia Economic Alliance. Third, the new defense and security cooperation. And fourth, why middle powers like Canada, Australia and the EU are starting to stick together. Because this visit may turn out to be far more important than it first appears. The highlight moment of this trip came from IFM Investors. Now, that isn't a small firm. It's one of Australia's largest international asset managers, overseeing more than 260 billion Australian dollars for pension funds. During Carney's visit, IFM announced its plan to invest up to $10 billion in Canada. Think about that for a second. That level of investment isn't made into small projects. It goes into infrastructure, energy systems, transportation networks and digital infrastructure, like data center. In other words, into the backbone of Canada's modern economy. This is where the Canada-Australian relationship becomes very interesting. Canadian pension funds have already been heavily invested in Australia for years. Organizations like the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board hold stakes in Australian toll roads, electricity grids and major infrastructure assets. Now we're starting to see money flows the other way too. Australian capital is coming into Canada and governments are announcing it because pension funds are becoming one of the most powerful economic tools in democratic countries. They provide long-term capital for projects that governments alone can't afford to build. In an era of political competitions, that kind of investment isn't just economic. It carries a much wider strategic purpose. Now, here's something many people don't realize. Canada and Australia are probably the 2 most similar economies in the developed world. Both are resource-rich democracies. Both are major exporters of energy, minerals and agricultural products. Both have massive land masses and relatively small populations, and both sit beside enormous economic giants. Canada lives next door to the USA. Australia lives next door to China. That creates similar pressures, which is why leaders from both countries created the Australia-Canada Economic Leadership Forum back in 2010. The idea was simple. Bring together business leaders, political leaders and policymakers every couple of years to figure out how the 2 countries can work together better than the years prior. And the results are already big. Two-way investments between Canada and Australia now exceeds $200 billion. We are talking mining projects, financial services, infrastructure developments. Canadian companies are expanding increasingly into Australia. Australian energy firms are opening offices in Canada. Tourism between the two countries is growing too. Australia is consistently among the top 10 sources of visitors to Canada. And when you step back and look at it, you realized something. Those two countries are basically natural partners. Same political systems, same language, same regulatory frameworks. That makes business corporations far easier than dealing with more complex markets. But the economic story is only half of it. There's also a growing security partnership. Canada and Australia are both members of the Five Eyes intelligence alliances. Both are also Commonwealth democracies. Our military train together, share alliances, and increasingly build defense systems together. One example is the over-the-horizon radar system for Canada's Arctic defense. This radar can detect aircrafts and missile threats thousands of kilometers away while still hidden behind the curve of the globe. A major capability in a region that is becoming strategically important. And here's the kicker. This deal represents the largest military export in Australian history. That's a pretty big signal about the level of trust between the two countries. But there's another area where cooperation is growing fast. Critical minerals, lithium, nickel, rare earths. Those are the materials needed for batteries, electronics, and modern weapon systems. Right now, much of the global supply chain runs through China. Canada and Australia both have huge mineral reserves, and we are now working together to build alternative supply chains. Australia is even joining Canada's G7 Critical Mineral Production Alliance to align strategic reserves and coordinate policies. The goal is simple: more leverage, less dependence, and less USA. Now let's take a look at the bigger geopolitical picture. Countries like Canada and Australia are middle powers. They are wealthy, democratic, military capable, but they are not superpowers. And right now, the world is increasingly shaped by competition between the United States and China. Now, add to that the two wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and the pressure on the middle powers is increasing. So, what's the response? Partnerships. I know, I talk about partnerships a lot, but partnerships for any country is the most basic but also the most important mechanism they have. Partnerships foster cooperation among countries that share democratic values and similar economic structures. And that's exactly what we are seeing here. Canada and Australia are working together on AI safety, clean energy partnerships, defense technology, polar science, and even space cooperation. And the European Union suddenly is not far away, because the EU faces the same strategic challenge, balancing an increasingly declining and at this point annoying relationship with Washington, while seeking new, reliable trade and safety alliances around the globe. In other words, the Canada-Australia partnership is part of a broader trend. A trend where Canada plays an important role. And as I mentioned before, it is the role of a bridging economy. An economy that links the democratic middle powers together to strengthen their economic reliance. So when you look at this visit by Prime Minister Mark Carney, it's clearly about investment and defense cooperation. And it's about a grounding strategy. The strategy that middle powers working together so they are not pushed around by larger ones. USA? Anyone? A $10 billion investment announcement, a $200 billion economic relationship already in place, and a new cooperation on everything from Arctic defense to critical minerals. Not bad for two countries separated by half the planet. But here's the question I want to ask you. Do you think Canada should deepen alliances with countries such as Australia and the Europeans to reduce its dependence on the United States and China? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown useful, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who wants to understand the bigger forces that are shaping Canada's future. Thanks for watching. I'm Wilfried Lemkuller with Europe Curious, and I'll see you in the next one.